Hi, and welcome back to the panel room. Tonight, we're going to be shedding those meat suits and we're going to be putting on all of our biological gear to talk about the future of cyborgs and automatons, robots, and AIs. But before we start trying to pretend like we have any intelligence going on, let's find out who's come here to share for the evening. So, Samantha, you are up first.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I write the Menopausal Superhero series and have been interested in cyborgs as a concept for about as long as I can remember, probably starting with Captain Hook.
Doc?
Hi, I'm Doc Coleman. I write about mad science, manners, and mayhem. Currently, I'm working on my steampunk series, The Adventures of Crackle and Bang, which does have some automata in it, but I'm also been a longtime fan of science fiction and always interested in the different ways that we approach bringing technology into our bodies and building new life forms with technology.
Patrick?
Hey, I'm Patrick Dugan. I am the author of the Darkest Storm trilogy and the Watchers of Asteria. I have my steampunk cyborg, and then in my newest book, which hopefully will be out sometime next year, Never Steal from Dragons, I have lots of fairies with cybernetic implants.
Lola?
My name's Lola Lariscy. I write science fiction and paranormal. I haven't really gone much into cyborgs and stuff like that because I don't know. I'm not good at writing, characters that do this. But maybe I'll learn. I'll have to go back to the 80s when we dance like this.
Nancy?
I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. With Jeannie Adams, I write the futuristic science fiction series Outcast Station. And I also independently publish several subgenres of romance. I don't have a single cyborg in anything I've written. I just like reading about them and watching them on screen.
Mel?
Hi, I'm Mel Todd. I've got the Twisted Luck series, the Gaelic Chronicles, and some other 20 plus novels and books. I definitely have AIs in my Gaelic series. Twisted Luck, not so much, mainly because magic makes most technology look like pantsers some days, but I do like reading about them, and I have a couple short stories with them, so I'm hoping to find out some new things to get my creative juices flowing tonight.
So as we start taking a look and talking about what really is a very wide range of lifelike beings throughout science fiction and fantasy, we've seen everything from a lot of early day automatons, going back even to Greek mythology, up to cyborgs, a lot of things that we're going to see that represent life or human life, or sometimes it is the combination of living beings with technology. So Samantha, when you're looking at stories and looking at whether it is AI driven, whether it's human driven, when you're looking at stories with technology, what is it you like to see in terms of the genre? What appeals to you?
I'm always interested in something different that sparks my imagination and makes me excited about future possibilities. And cyborg characters and things like human augmentation and that kind of thing are very interesting for that. To think that I already live in a time where I can have parts of me replaced when they wear out. And so I can be a cyborg. I'm not yet, but my dad is. In fiction, we often do that with a bigger eye to fun, not just fixing your heart that doesn't function properly anymore, or your knee that's not as strong as it used to be, but replacing it with something bigger, stronger, faster, like the $6 Million Man. And giving people additional abilities that are something that are not natural to humans. So that plays in a lot of things I'm interested in. And thematically, there's just so much to play with in those kinds of stories about what makes human and where the line is of sentience and all of that kind of stuff. So much rich material.
Doc, how about you?
I was going to say Samantha kind of hit it right there in terms of looking at cyborgs and AI is really a way of examining what it means to be human. What is that dividing line? How do you pass the Turing test? Because if you can't tell the difference, there isn't one.
Yeah, well, there's some of the people we've got around us I'm not sure could pass the Turing test either.
This is true too. and sometimes only a handful of lines of code can pass it. So but it's right now I'm writing in the steampunk aesthetic, so a lot of that I get into the artistry of duplicating the natural function in clockwork, and that's really fun. But looking at the sci-fi side, some of the ideas of what you could theoretically do with nanites, either by themselves or as a support system to the body, are absolutely fascinating, and it's interesting area to explore.
Patrick?
I really like, really Samantha killed it. So we can go to the next question. No, just kidding. So I really like, it gives you a different, because magic gets used a lot, and cyborgs and AI tends to be the same kind of flair. The one thing I don't like when I read science fiction where there's a lot of AI or cybernetics or anything like that is where that is the reason that the story runs, and not the story isn't telling itself and then the technology isn't enhancing the story, it is the story. So that really is kind of off-putting to me if I read a book like that. But just being able to open up human potential to be able to expand what your characters can and can't do is just fascinating to me. Kind of what Doc said with, what is it to be human? If you can, jump 3 stories, are you still human? Because normal humans can't do that.
So, because I think we have nailed it well, I have a really better question here for the next 3, which is, how are you defining human, and how do you see that being reflected in the stories? So, Lola?
This kind of goes back to what I say about monsters. For some reason, writers sometimes tend to make humans saintly. Humans are always perfect. They balance their emotions well. They emote. They're intelligent. They're kind. They're sweet. And then, of course, the monster is evil. The AI is evil, and that's how people. Some writers. That's how they differentiate between them. But like somebody said a few minutes ago, we don't. Humans aren't necessarily smart, and they're not necessarily going to pass the Turing test. There's just too much of a delineation, I think. I mean, sometimes the humans, you can't really tell the difference. And so what does that leave the story? If you're trying to have an AI or a cyborg be more human, well, they could just be themselves, and they may seem as human as some people can get. So I think it's really a little more murky than some people tend to make it in stories.
Nancy?
Well, I would agree with murky. I used to teach a course at UNC Charlotte on science fiction, fantasy, and society. And one of the things we looked at was the role of technology in society. And one of the books we studied was The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. And R. Daniil Olival, I think I'm pronouncing that right, is the android cop in that book. And the students really related to it a lot because he seemed like a human character in that he had emotions. He made choices without being programmed, because I think sentience and awareness of self is a factor in what makes you human. It's not enough by itself. And if you go by Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, one of which is not harming humans, that's not empathy so much as it's programming. And so I think you cross the line when it's a choice based on empathy and emotion. And I think I'm just assuming intelligence here. Although, with all of us, I wouldn't argue that all humans are geniuses. But I remember there was an episode of Next Generation where the whole issue was, is data human or is he a mechanical construct and therefore property? Mm-hmm. And it's one of my favorite episodes of Next Gen. I don't remember a lot about it now, but I remember the issues and the themes that it explored. And so for me, I guess the dividing line is probably the ability to feel. And by that, I don't mean feel a pinprick, it's mean feel emotionally.
Mel?
So there's a couple different points we've brought up. Part of it is what defines you as human, and part of it is what defines something as sentient that isn't human. So at least for me, the verbiage needs to change and say, what is the difference between something that is biologically created that evolves and grows and something that was created by those biologicals? Because I firmly believe dolphins and whales and my cat all have personalities and can feel, but I'm really, really pretty sure, not positive, my vacuum cleaner doesn't. I think for me that the dividing line is a human will do things that will cause great harm to themselves because they feel like it's the right thing to do. And an AI cannot do that level of self-sacrifice. They will do what is logical, what makes sense, what checks all the boxes. And I think that's when you make that leap between highly, highly intelligent programs and sentience is when you do something because it's right, even though it makes absolutely no logical sense.
Let's actually start working kind of through some of the different phases and things we see. I'd like to start kind of on the transhumanist side, where we're looking at the interface of people and technology. I mean, we see a lot of this today, and we see that this is one of those things that's growing, whether it's as simple as a knee replacement or a hip replacement or pacemakers or technology like that. We're seeing a lot of development in artificial limbs, artificial hearts, other things that are going where they're still in that replacement stage. But one of the things we do see a lot of in fiction is going beyond that to the idea of augmentation. Samantha, you were mentioning, the infamous $6 Million Man, $6 Million Woman from the 70s, some attempted reboots in there. So, Doc, from that standpoint, what are the elements, if you're looking at augmenting a human being with technology in that way, what are kind of the things, what are the kind of challenges, the questions that this gets to bring up for us? And do you have a good example of one you like?
Actually, that's kind of funny you asked me this question because I was just looking up the title before we started, and the one I like is a book by David Weber called Mutineer's Moon, in which
Dalek. The sentence I think was pronounced Dalek, Dahlak.
The Dahak trilogy, yeah. But basically, the moon ends up being a giant spaceship, and the all of humanity are the descendants of the original crew, and the intelligence that runs the ship gets a hold of this astronaut and decides that since this is the first human that is not that has been in its grasp, that it's going to make this person captain, and so it does a full augmentation on this person, basically takes them apart, rebuilds them tougher and stronger, and puts all kinds of nanites in them to enhance them. But after this astronaut goes through this process and wakes up, he never actually doubts what has happened to him. It's like, I'm still me. I still feel like me. Never actually addresses, am I the person I was, or am I now a machine that's a copy of the person I was? It's very Ship of Theseus territory, but
7:24 p.m.
Okay.
So, Patrick, how about you?
So, I think my favorite augmentation in fiction is Richard Morgan's Altered Carbon. And I think that the ability to basically make people immortal by implanting a basically black box in the back of their head so that you can record all their memories and then use it to either put you in new bodies or send you across space-time to inhabit a new body, which is what happens with Kovacs in the story. I think that opens up a lot of interesting dilemmas. In the TV show, they run past a little girl who was 9 years old who gets put into an old homeless person's body because her insurance didn't cover a age-appropriate body for her. So I think a lot of those stories really, what we were talking about earlier, where they're playing up what it is to be human. Now that you basically are immortal, what are you doing differently that knowing that virtually can't die? So I think that is a really interesting play on using technology to change the tableau of human existence.
The Methuselahs in that book really got me. Like, it's an interesting thing in any kind of story that has an immortal characters, like the effects of immortality.
Yeah.
And I think that's one book that did an excellent job looking at the really dark sides of that and what it might mean over time, what those people would become like. And it's not good.
And I haven't read the book, but I've watched the TV show, and also has an interesting take on AI. But yeah, we were talking about augmented. So
Lola, how about you?
I can't remember. Is it just books or TV shows and movies too?
Go for it. Whatever makes you happy.
All right. So the Borg is the first thing that scared the poopy out of me when it came to any kind of like cyborg AI type thing, because they're terrifying. I mean, they're all part of this electronic hive mind, and they have no personality anymore. They're just vessels. And being a kid, well, maybe not a kid, but, high school or whatever, and seeing the Borg and being like, oh my God, what if that happens to me? I'm going to be Lola Quicious. I don't want to be Lola Quicious. And that just scared the heck out of me. And it's part of that uncanny valley, I think, because you can still see the human features. You've still got the skin and everything, but then you've got the mechanical thing over their eye, and they have the very mechanical way of talking and everything. So it's just really unsettling.
Nancy?
Well, there's three that I think cross the border and work really well. One is Tony Stark, because Tony's gone without that atomic heart.
Mm-hmm.
And while it doesn't seem to affect Tony's basic personality, it did, if I'm remembering Iron Man 3 correctly, and I might not be, create problems for him in his life because he was just so thoroughly Iron Man. It was taking over his life and his priorities. The second one is in the DC comic books, Vic Stone, who's also in the Justice League movie as Cyborg. And he was a high school football player who was in a terrible accident, and his father essentially augmented most of his body with mechanical parts. And he was not quite so bitter in the comic book as he was in the movie, but it was an issue for him, wrestling with what he was like now. And when he joined the what were then called the Teen Titans in the comic book, he was sometimes wrestling with what he could do and not wanting to be just that on the team. See me as me. And the third one that I think is probably one we could talk about all evening is the Vision. Because he's a replacement, but he's a new creation. He's Jarvis, and he's humanoid, and in some ways you could argue that he is the most decent and the most sensitive, or one of the most decent and sensitive members of the Avengers. And so he kind of crosses the line from replacement into, well, there's really not much in the way of human elements in the Vision in terms of blood, flesh, and bone. But he seems to have a human soul. And the point in WandaVision where he's talking about with fake Vision, and if you haven't seen WandaVision yet, I'm sorry, at this point, that's your fault. So if this is a spoiler, just put your fingers in your ears for a second. He's talking to the fake Vision about the ship of Theseus and how much can you add before it's not the same ship anymore. How much of the Vision can you change before it's not the Vision anymore? And so I thought actually he came across a lot better in WandaVision than he did in the comic books, but I haven't read a lot of Avengers, so that might just be me. So those were the three I would pick.
Mel?
And see, I won't touch the Vision thing because I would go off onto rants and arguments because I have issues, but that's a totally different panel.
We can start that fight in a little while.
Yeah, what's funny is the two that appear to me, I think that what I don't see enough of is, so when you were talking about Mutineer's Moon, it never really struck me as him being cyborged or even augmented, because it was everything human. It was just fine-tuned pretty much to perfection. Nothing was actively replaced or changed. They were just made the absolute best you could be. If you remember, there was an old book series called The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever.
Yes.
And the very beginning, before he gets transferred into the world, he has basically a disease. I want to say that it was leprosy, but it meant that he couldn't feel anything. He could set his arm on fire and he wouldn't notice until he looked down and saw it burning. And it actively changed the character, because it's very hard to create empathy and emotions to anybody else when you literally cannot feel anything. It didn't matter if you hit him, if you cut him, he was just there, and it created this wall. And then I think the inverse that you see is RoboCop. They took so much away from him that there basically wasn't anything left. But I don't think that's what almost killed him or made him a machine. It was that they took all of the sense of intimacy away. Thomas Covenant had no intimacy because he couldn't feel anything. RoboCop, I cannot remember the character's name at this point, sorry, lost Murphy, that's right, Murphy, lost all of the intimacy because he was then just treated as a tool. There was no hugging. There was no, hey, do you want to get coffee? Hey, are you feeling okay? They purposely took everything that made him human and cut it off, which is a lot like what the Borg do. They take everything that makes you human, which for 99% of the world is connection and intimacy. And I'm not necessarily talking sex. I'm just talking the hugs, the touches, the smiles, your favorite barista, knowing your coffee. If you lose all that, you lose being human.
Yeah, and so just to jump on that.
Oh, go ahead, Patrick.
No, please, Samantha, go ahead. I'll chime in.
When I was thinking about this panel, I used it as an excuse to go back and watch a couple episodes of the Bionic Woman, because I remember it so very fondly from my childhood, but I haven't really watched it since then. And I remember that my dad and I used to argue over who was better, the Bionic Man or the Bionic Woman. And I definitely thought the Bionic Woman was, and I don't think that's just because I'm also a woman, but because she was so human. Like, you know, Steve was very much a stoic hero sort, not real emotional. And so I was much more connected to Jamie, who, you know, dated and cared about people and was funny sometimes. Their powers and everything were pretty similar, but that she held on to that humanity. And I think that's what made her work better for me as a character.
And I think to Mel's point with Murphy, they took away his memories.
Yep.
And so not only did he lose all of his intimacy and the physical touch, he also lost all of his anchors that keep you in place and keep, when things go bad, those anchors are what keep you stable. Your friends, your family, all the, things you've done that you're proud of, those are the things that you fall back on. And when things went bad for Murphy, he had nothing. And that's when it started shorting out his programming, because that need was so strong that it actually overrode the blocks they put in place to keep him from being human.
And those are what makes the difference between doing what's right versus following your programming.
Right.
So let me ask from a slightly more esoteric standpoint, are we talking about at what point does the person lose their soul over to becoming that level of technology?
What Patrick was saying about memory really strikes me in that way, because, we were talking about part of these stories are about the line of what's human. And a lot of times it's portrayed as the big difference is your emotions, but emotions are so tied into memories and background. And I can think of a few stories where the person having lost their memory is as much as how they lose their humanity as anything. Even my beloved Jamie Summers starts out with a memory issue, and you see it in other characters. So that's something I'd like to look at a little more, myself, not necessarily us in this field, but the idea of to what degree is it our memory that makes us human?
Well, and that reminds me of there was a character in the TV show Heroes, and it wasn't an AI or a cyborg issue, but his ability was to take away a memory. And that's how they kept some of the other people in line. It's, you're going to lose your memory of your dead wife and child if you don't do what we say.
Well, let me throw an interesting question out there, and it's going to be a series that has had 2 incarnations. And I'm thinking about Battlestar Galactica, where we had, the great 70s. For the most part, you had the big metal clankers walking around. You had the leaders that were a little more intelligent. AI had a little snark to them. Versus in the retelling and the reincarnation, while you had some technology there, you also had ones that were, in essence, presenting as human, presenting as living beings with differentiation. They had different personalities, or at least different flavors of the personalities. They had, they developed different takes, different beliefs. So Patrick, if you think about that from the standpoint of telling the story of the automaton, telling the story of what really defines being as human, is there something in the dichotomy between how we see the Cylons presented and the robot war presented that really makes a big difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that came to mind when you were saying that is Locked In by John Scalzi. And the premise of the book is that there's a disease that goes around, and the people who get it are basically locked into their own bodies. And so they come up with a neural network that lets you control a robot. And so it's a human running the robot, but the way that non-locked in humans treat the robots is horrific. And they know that there's a person hooked to that robot, and just because they don't look human, they are treated as second-class citizens.
So you mean anybody on the internet?
Yeah, pretty much. I think the big danger in a lot of these stories is you go, oh well, that would never happen. No, read Twitter. It's like you'll get an earful of how horrible people can be over something as superficial as like skin color or religion. They at the end of the day, humans are humans, but there's still this differentiation based on aesthetics that make people treat you different, and it is even worse when they think that you are not human and you're just feeling, a robot, and it's, and you can see it throughout, science fiction and fantasy. Those creatures are treated, like, a non-cyborg one, but like Dobie the house elf. They treat him like crap because he is a lower, species. Same thing.
That just made me think of something. It's probably a story idea, but if I went to Jim and went, "You're a real jerk," he'd probably look at me and go, "Yeah." And if I got it, you could tell I know him or something.
I'm feeling the love tonight. I'm feeling the
everybody
love.
shaking their head. Yep, that's exactly what Jim would say.
Not in a Twitter war where I'm facing only the idea of Jim and he's only the idea of me. It's like, and granted, I don't think either of us are like this, but it's like those boundaries come off. It makes me wonder if there's something beyond the obvious that when I'm talking to him, maybe there's a smell, a chemical, a pheromone. Maybe it's micro expression. Maybe there's something that we don't consciously pay attention to that changes how we interact. Because if what Patrick was saying is right, that this is a robot that is taking the place of somebody who is basically handicapped, but you treat the robot horrible. I wonder if there's something else in how we actually appear to each other that we don't think about.
I think there is. I belong to an amateur press alliance, which is kind of like a chain letter for grown-ups, but everybody sends their contribution to a central mailer who puts it into sets and sends it out. And over the years in this organization, we've had some real serious blow-ups because what was said didn't have a tone of voice with it, and it didn't have a facial expression with it. And so when you have a 2-month lag between responses, there's lots of time for people to get really upset. So you respond and you tell somebody you're really upset and what a jerk you are to say that to me, and I can't believe you said that, or I can't believe you said that about these people. Well, they read that 2 months later, and they respond to it, and you read that 2 months later. Now, with the internet, it's faster. It's like an hour or a day. But I think what Mel says has a lot of merit to it because there's no nuance from tone of voice or facial expression or anything like that. And those are cues that we use to interpret is somebody really trying to insult me or they're trying to be funny.
Well, context matters.
Mm-hmm.
And
people leaning more xenophobic or not. And some people are really looking for a reason to other you, just in their regular encounters with people, and other people respond with more curiosity and get to know you-ness. I've watched it on a small scale where a woman who taught next door to me had a heck of a time with the other teachers in our school. And I think it came down to that she'd been raised in New York City and she was loud and boisterous and they all perceived her as rude. And I'm like, no, she just grew up differently than y'all. And so it can really, if people are looking to see the differences, that's what they'll see.
So this discussion puts me in mind of three separate properties. The first is Isaac Asimov's The Bicentennial Man, where Andrew goes out as a robot wearing clothes and immediately gets picked on by people because thanks to the second law, they have power over him. They can tell him what to do and he has no choice but to do it. So it's a certain part, there's that illusion of power. The next one is surrogates. A world where everyone was using robot duplicates of themselves that they controlled from a couch at home, and that became the new normal, so that it was the poor people who actually got out and did things in their own bodies by themselves. And when the one detective loses his surrogate and has to go out in person, how strange it is for him and how disgusted other people that he runs into are that he's there in person, as a contrast. And the third one that comes to mind is David Brin's Kiln People, which is a similar type world that people stay at home, but they, depending on how financially well off they are, they can create ceramic duplicates of themselves, and they can adjust their quality. So this one's more attractive, this one's smarter, and so forth, and copy their personality into it. And it goes out there and does functions for the day, and then comes back at the end of the day, and the memories get transferred back into the body. And if they don't come back in a day, they fall apart and the memories are lost. Just different aspects of that perception of what is the other, because especially in Killing People, because you start having some really strange ways that people structure their lives out of being able to duplicate themselves.
So let me actually throw another property out there that kind of goes along these lines, and that is the Stepford Wives. Okay, now I can step away and I'll be back in an hour. But, if we look at that idea of the property of replacement of humans, as well, I think this goes along with that story idea as well, because it's about which one's the monster. And of course, it's the spouses that are trying to get more compliant ones. And depending on which version of the story you see as to how well that works out. But, when we look at those kinds of ideas and those kinds of topics, again, we're flirting with what's humanity and where does the bridge fall with the intelligence. So any thoughts from anybody on that one? Mel, go ahead.
I want to counter your Stepford Wives with two movies. Cherry 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Where basically the entire journey was to find out that there was value to humanity. Basically that's what it was. And the other one that I'd say for Stepford Wives is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Because either way, you're trying to create something, not have a relationship with someone. Stepford Wives, they didn't want a partner and a spouse. They wanted an invisible servant. Invasions of the Body Snatchers, they wanted to replace people. What was really scary was how long it took everybody to realize this. And Cherry 2000, he was chasing something, that intimate connection, that again, it's really hard to have with something that's programmed.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really good movie, though. I should go rewatch it.
I was going to say I haven't seen that in probably at least 25 years.
At least.
It was
Stepford Wives, I think, is a good line into another thing that you see in all these stories with robots or androids or AIs or cyborgs or whatever, is the exploration of exploitation. When systems are built on exploitation, and then a certain class of people, women or people of color or your previous robots, whoever they are this time, refuse to be exploited, then we try to create something else to exploit. And I think that's something that these stories give us a way to talk about, that is maybe harder to do in something that's strictly speaking realistic. And that's part of the appeal too.
See, I was going to bring up Westworld because of the whole concept of replacing people, because that was the theme of the original movie, that they were going to replace politicians and take over the world. But you've actually brought an even nicer segue into it with the looking at the TV series, that they were trying to achieve immortality by creating host bodies and transferring memories into it, and that failed miserably. But they ended up creating AIs that rebelled against them and acted more human than the people they were dealing with.
Let's talk a little bit
back to Battlestar for a second before we move on.
Sure.
One of the things that most struck me about Battlestar, with the question of who's human and who's not, are the original members of the fleet who did not know they were Cylons. And no one else suspected they were Cylons. And sort of the bottom line about that is, if I know you're on team A and I'm team B, you're a threat to me and I have to do something about you because of this label that's on you. Whereas if you're team A and I'm team B and I'm a threat to you, and this is how we ended up at war together. And one of the things we looked at in that course on science fiction and fantasy was not only technology, but how societies treat those who are other. And that's really what all these characters are. The Stepford wives are other to the men. The Cylons and the humans are other to each other. And sometimes it's literally just a label. Like Patrick was saying, it's something superficial that really doesn't matter in terms of the essence of who or what a being is, but it's a label. And that was why I thought that bit about suddenly discovering that several members of the fleet that we thought were on Team Human all this time, in fact, don't fit on Team Human. No matter how well they fit, they don't fit the label. So I just wanted to drop that in there before we moved along.
So if
I think Lola's talking.
I was just going to say, one of the things I always wondered about with Battlestar Galactica. So if I remember correctly, the original 5 had been built by the Centurions, something I don't remember. But if they seem human enough, and I'm guessing somewhere in their military careers, they had X-rays and MRIs and stuff, they seemed human. They had all the innards, the brains and stuff. So really at that point, except for the red glowy thing in the back, what makes them different from us? I mean, how do we tell the difference? And actually, if you follow it to the end, they're not different from us. So if you've seen the end, you know what I'm talking about. That's all.
Well, and then there's Athena Agathon, who's the child of a human and a Cylon. And there again, if you haven't watched BSG and this is spoiling it for you, I'm sorry, but it's been over for a long time. And
It's
that's
been a long time.
Very long.
But there was a lot of consternation and curiosity when Sharon turned up pregnant, because this is Cylon. This is not how Cylons do it. You know, you download into a new body and that's it. So it was interesting.
Mel, I think you had something as well.
I haven't watched enough of Battlestar Galactica to make anything significant other than Daggett was the most interesting character in the first series.
You got to keep the dogs happy.
Yep.
So let's actually dive a little bit deeper into the same idea, though. I mean, if we look at Blade Runner and some of these ideas, which, you know, Blade Runner's entire premise was, what does it mean to be human? And just that search for knowledge. I mean, if you look at the last speech from Roy Batty, which is here's everything I've seen, here's everything I've done, and those memories are gone. I mean, that's a very human idea and a very human emotion. So if we look then and move further into the idea of AIs and artificial intelligences, artificial beings, you know, what do these kinds of things mean for us? I mean, we've seen, you know, if we look at Doctor Who, we've got several flavors in there to work with and play with. If we look at, going back to Asimov and iRobot, we see varying degrees of intelligence. And again, we're back to, are they servants? Are they, you know, or what are they in terms of the society and the rules that go? You know, if we look at the ideas of hard technology and the AIs, there's a lot to be unpacked there. So Nancy, any thoughts?
The AI who sticks with me the most is Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey, because he makes his own decision and snaps his programming. And I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were asking me, but that's kind of was what coming to mind when you talked, that Hal should not be human, but somehow he acquired choice, which he really isn't supposed to have.
Mel?
Honestly, the best representation that I can think of, and this shows probably that I'm not watching enough TV, honestly, was Wally. I think both, it is that self-sacrifice. It's the willing to give up something that you want, even if you're programmed to want it, to be willing to walk away from it. And I think Wally really encapsulates the entire idea of humanity much better than the humans in the movie did. Uh, I don't know. I still think at the bottom, there is no greater love hath man than to give his life for another. And be that Christianity or not, that tends to, I think, resonate through most of the universe. That is the definition. I know. Margaret Mead, one of her students once asked her, what was the first sign of civilization? They're like, a knife, a bowl, a cup. And she said, no, the first sign of civilization is a broken femur. And she said, the reason for that is an animal will die if they break their leg. If you find a society where someone takes the time to wrap it, to feed that person, to take care of that person, that being, that creature, whatever, until they can heal, that is the first sign of a civilization. And I think that's the first sign of what we call humanity, regardless of you being a dolphin, an ant, an alien, or a cyborg. If you take the time to take care of someone else at the expense of yourself, that is the definition of humanity. And I think that computers are just as capable of doing it as we are. We talked about them. Hal breaking it, Wally breaking it, iRobot. That's what it is. That's humanity. It's taking care of somebody else at the expense of yourself.
Samantha?
My favorite exploration of AI that I've read recently is Becky Chambers' work. She has a series called, I think, The Wayfarer. Her books all have crazy long titles, like A Long Way from a Small Angry Planet. By the time you've written the title, you fell off the book. But she has across the series, there's a character who is a ship at first, a ship AI, and later this consciousness is moved into more of a shell that change from like being a ship to being a being in a smaller scale and choosing what she wants when she's not really chosen before. And there's love elements in there, and it's really, really interesting. And Becky also explores kind of those levels, like we were talking about. Is it a servant? Is it a separate sentient being as deserving of respect and good treatment as me? And there's, you run into the strange situation where this character who used to be a ship and is now sort of a person is using a kiosk with a low level AI in it, and having weird feelings about how that is, because it's like that kind of also is me. And so it's just something I really admire in her work. I highly recommend, if you want to explore AI and kind of where those lines are or could be, Becky Chambers.
Doc?
I've been enjoying these answers. Can you restate the original question?
Well, sort of going in and looking at the idea of AIs and sentience and how that kind of comes across, how we use that into challenging what really is human, what really is that idea of identity. At what point is it just a difference of a biological machine versus artificial? What are the elements of story, and what are the elements that you're looking at when you're dealing with these artificial intelligences?
I don't know how to answer that, but I can tell you that right now you're reminding me of Frederick Pohl's, I believe that's right. The Heechee stories, where you start with a man who is being used to help explore an alien space station that's found and go through different gravity wells to find out if there's something survivable. And as the series progresses, he becomes fabulously wealthy because they make a rich find, and then he's an AI that when his body got so old, they copied him into a computer, and he's living a virtual existence. And it's kind of looking at the narrative of that transition, about what it is that are the core aspects of the person, of the character, as they are a biological entity, and how they deal with the events in life as the pieces are taken away and it's replaced with the digital environment, the digital equivalent. And in some ways you can also look at it in reverse, because there have been stories about about AIs that have started out and become so advanced and being treated as people, so they become people, to the point that somebody actually goes and builds a biological body for them and then downloads their personality into them. I think that happened to a character in Highlands to Sail Beyond the Sunset, but I could have the wrong book. But there was like a household AI that basically moved into humanhood, so they built a body for her, and she didn't just puppet the body, but moved a copy of herself into the body. And after a while, they had distinctly different personalities from the experience of living as opposed to being an electronic entity. I know this has gotten rambly, but it's all going back to what is the state of your being, and how do you explore that?
Patrick? Sorry, Doc. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Just the last thought is like, I kind of wonder if how that opens the door to transgenderism, but that's a different panel.
Patrick?
So, my favorite AI is Winter Muth from Neuromancer, but the one I'm going to talk about here is Murderbot. Martha Wells. Oh my God, they're so fucking good. Murderbot is a security droid who hacks his own programming and becomes free. And it goes, as the books, he starts off as just the security guard for this landing party. And then, of course, the humans do all the stupid stuff and he's going to pull them out. But as the books go on, it really gets into what makes him any different than the humans he's protecting, and where does he fit in society when now he is one of the only free AIs roaming around, because everything else is locked down behind programming walls. And to the point where he is trying to free other robots from the shackles, and they don't want it, because they're like, no, why would I want that? And really all he wants is just to like watch TV on streaming and like be left alone. So they're just, if you have not read Murderbot Diaries, oh my God, go pick them up and read them. They're short, but they are fantastic.
Lola?
I'm a bit of an outlier. My favorite AI cyborg stories are the ones where they're least human, because they scare the bleep out of me. Speaking of curse words, but anyways, they scare the bleep out of me. You know, the Borg, the Matrix, the computers that rule everything. It's just when you have that blank face, that blank slate that you can't argue with, you cannot negotiate because they have no emotions. That's what makes me like start shaking and like, oh crap, we're in trouble. Oh, so I enjoy things like that.
So we started with the idea of augmentation of people and real humanity. And for whatever that means, and we've moved into, going through various stages. But there's one last big question, and we've seen a lot of these questions coming up in books, TV, film, especially in about the last 20 years. And this is revisiting one of the oldest ideas that we see, which is Deus Ex Machina. When does the technology, in essence, appear to come from God or become the next deity to be worshipped and that controls everything? It just sort of shows up to deal with the unsolvable mystery, the unsolvable problem, or sometimes like in Doctor Who, the Daleks, the Cybermen, they're supposed to be the unstoppable problem. So Mel, any thoughts around the idea of the Deus Ex Machina? You're on mute.
You're on mute. Still on mute? There you go.
It helps if I don't click the screen. It helps if you click the app to unmute yourself.
I've heard that.
Most of the Deus Ex Machina I've seen done of almost always either magic or gods. God, which is literally what it means. God comes down and rescues you. If you're talking about modern day humans, I can think of a few places where it's starting to creep up. A great example is the show Andromeda, which I absolutely loved. That's very much at a certain point when you have spaceships, which make most of our aircraft carriers look like nothing, have human or way greater than human level intelligence and sentience. At that point, they're there. Our current world, you'd have to work really hard to prove to me that Facebook and Twitter don't already control all of us. So I'm not quite sure that it's a fantasy as much as it is reality, given the amount of control that's there right now. And yes, that's my not sarcastic comment.
Yeah, well, I've long argued that, the first real sentient AI is going to be popping out and it's going to wear a tweed suit and try to sell you something. So, Samantha?
I don't think I have too much to contribute on this one. It's not an area I've thought a lot about. I'll let other people.
Doc?
I need to think about this. Go on and come back to me.
Thanks,
So
Doc.
Patrick.
You're welcome,
Patrick.
Yes, sir.
Can you put on your deity hood and
Yes. I think one of the issues with AI and augmentation as far as the God complex is that technology tends to go in a fairly linear, though sometimes steep, trajectory. So I think if it is technology that has grown up through human civilization, there isn't really as much. It's when you get into things coming in from outside. So time travel, aliens, those type things. The Borg, is a great example of, if you had never seen that before, that science is so far past what we have that could be seen as magic. And so I think it really comes down to what you have dealt with beforehand. So if we took a cell phone back to the 1960s and showed somebody, they'd be like, oh my God, it's magic. Of course, you want to have cell towers so it wouldn't work, but you know what I mean. So I think really, and I think like Jules Verne's had a lot easier to have the Deus Ex Machina, because the technology wasn't advanced. As you get higher up the technology tree, I think it becomes harder and harder for that to come in. Now, if you all of a sudden, take your hyperdrive and blow it through a Star Destroyer, which has never been done in canon, then I guess you could say that's Deus Ex Machina. So there you go. At least I had an answer.
Lola.
I think my Deus Ex Machina is when it turns out that it's not cyborg, it's not alien, it's not whatever. It's actually people from the future coming back to try to right a wrong. And I'm dealing with that in a show that I've been watching. I won't spoil it, but yeah. So that seems to happen a lot. They're not really aliens. They're not really this. They're us from the future. And it's kind of like, that's a bummer. I don't want us. I can turn on freaking any show and get humans. I want monsters. Give me monsters. It's very frustrating.
Nancy?
What Patrick was saying reminded me of Arthur C. Clarke saying that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Right. There's a Star Trek episode where they go to a planet and it's kind of a tropical planet. People are running around in like sarongs and loincloths, and they're worshiping some cave thing that turns out to actually be mechanical. And I cannot remember the title of the episode because that would be too useful. Mm-hmm. And there's some other science fiction TV show that I watched, and I want to say it's Star Trek or Stargate, where they come to a planet and the people start considering them to be gods. And then, of course, everything goes horribly wrong, because if it doesn't go horribly wrong, you don't have a show. But, of course, I can't remember the name of that one either. But I can remember one form of technology that actually assumed godlike status, and that's the computer in Colossus the Forbin Project, because it was created to control nuclear war. And it and its counterpart in Russia got together and decided that their duty was to protect the humans from themselves, and they took over the world. So they sort of assumed godlike powers, even though the humans were not worshiping them and wanted to pull the plug on them and couldn't figure out how to do it. And then, of course, there's Skynet, which was so pervasive in the Terminator films.
So I'm going to throw one more question out there just to sort of loop things off, but if you don't like it. Oh, go ahead, Doc. Did you come up with an answer?
Oh, yeah, actually. As soon as Patrick started talking, I realized what it was I wanted to say about it. When we're dealing there's this Machina, the God and the Machine. In one way, you have the machines will come down and fix everything. The aliens will come down and fix everything. And that's just
like the politicians will come down and fix everything.
People abdicating their responsibility to maintain their own lives and build their own civilizations. But the flip side of that, you have the Frankenstein complex, that the machines that we make that can think will come up and destroy us. And I'm finding myself going back to Westworld because they built two of them. That you had the one machine that they built in order to predict markets so they could make tons of money, and basically started manipulating events around the world to such a degree that they kind of paralyzed everything. And the people that thought they were in control of it didn't realize they were running somebody else's program to stop them. And you also had one of the copies of now I forget her name. You had one of the copies of one of the hosts who was running simulations with humans, had found a way to control humans through sound, and was running simulations in thinking that there was some secret she was going to unlock. And it's like, you were in control of everything. You didn't want your people to be hurt? Fine. Don't get hurt anymore. But there was that combination of power and revenge there. And those are very human qualities that whenever you've got the machines trying to take over, they're being more human than ever, because that's how things work out of fear. And a lot of that is like, a lot of these Frankenstein fantasies are built along the idea of, what if the machine wants something that we don't want? And it's like, okay, where did you get the idea that the machine could want something?
I want to throw one. Oh, I just want to throw one last thing out here. Is, and if there's something else you've got an idea on that we haven't touched on tonight, feel free to dive into that too. But just looking at the question of what happens when we take the human and then they bring them into the technology. Yeah, I'm thinking like Transcendence, or even things like Lawnmower Man, where we watch the consciousness pulled into the technology. We saw some of that with The Matrix. There's a lot of different presentations like this. But is there a representation for you at which that kind of a technology, what does that really question for us in terms of character and humanity? Because it's really what we've driven around, is that idea of what is humanity? What's the person? What is that essence? So who wants that one?
I actually don't think you have to go that far. I think the best example we have right now of technology and human as amputees, and the person I'm thinking of is Uwe Boll, because he technically did something nobody expected. He used prosthetics to win the Olympics. He ran on legs that were made by machines. And I think, I don't know, for most of the amputees I know personally have lost things like toes and stuff to diabetes, so they don't normally have full leg or full arm replacements. But from what I've seen, there's this very interesting love-hate relationship between themselves and the machine that I don't think I see played with enough in fiction, because it's like, I need this to do all the things I used to be able to do, or that I never could do, but I have to take it off and it's never part of me. And I think that's a really interesting where we're growing, as opposed to people like my mother who have had a shoulder replacement. She has fake bones in her arm, and you never really think of it because it's not there and it is a part of you. And I think that's actually where there's a really interesting dividing line between what's a part of you and what you're removing.
I think that's an interesting progression you see in going back to the idea of cyborgs, where somebody isn't a creation but is human with machine elements. That, like, you some of those stories start with like repair, right? The person is damaged and we replace their broken part with some substitute, like Furiosa from Fury Road has her prosthetic arm, right? And there's no indication that I can remember in the story that her arm is an augmentation. It's a replacement, that it's not like stronger, other than that it's not made of flesh, so it's less likely to bleed, but it doesn't give her super strength or anything like that. So you kind of start with that replacement. But then in other stories, we'll see it get into augmentation. So Misty Knight also lost an arm, but the arm she got was in some ways better than her original arm. It could do things that her other arm couldn't have done. And then you get into like cyberpunk stories where maybe there is nothing wrong with that piece of you, but you have some technology added anyway to get something, some extra or beyond kind of ability. Like your eyes work fine, but you can get these implant eyes that will also give you X-ray vision and extra kinds of things. And I think it's an interesting spectrum to look at. And in different, depending on how exactly the cyborg character is set up and kind of how it happened did it happen to them? Did they choose it? Was it an augmentation or a replacement? you end up with really different kinds of stories. And that's what makes all of this so much fun.
To jump on,
oh, go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry, to jump on what Mel was saying, I actually wrote Quinn in my steampunk series is a blacksmith who gets his arm chopped off. And so he has this kind of love-hate relationship with his arm because in the middle of a fight, the straps come loose or somebody pulls on it and all of a sudden his arm doesn't work anymore. So now he's in a fight for his life with one arm and trying to figure out how to get his arm reattached so he can actually fight more. As far as what Samantha was saying, this is real life, but it was funny because when they came out with Google Glasses, remember those? The developers realized about a month in when they were doing their field tests that if your head went like this, they had to shut off the camera because men would be at the urinal going to the bathroom and look down and it was recording it and broadcasting it.
Oh my God.
Lovely.
So the Pandora box of technology, nobody would have thought spam came out of email, but I always thought that was hysterical that it's like you have to know that the person puts their head down means don't record that because they're going to the bathroom. So there's my little anecdote for the night.
I wanted to pick up on something that Mel said earlier about self-sacrifice. It doesn't have anything to do with intelligence being sucked into the machine because I got nothing on that. I'm sorry. But the Terminator movies are kind of a progression of character from the first cold, heartless killing machine like Lola was talking about to Arnold Schwarzenegger's Terminator as the hero. And then I haven't seen all of them because I think it's Terminator Salvation where Christian Bale plays John Connor and Sam Worthington is the Terminator and he doesn't know he's a Terminator. And so through the movie, they start dropping little hints that he actually might not be a human. He might be a Terminator. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end of the movie, and that's a spoiler alert too, he realizes he's a Terminator and he faces that he's a Terminator and he sacrifices himself to save everybody. And so in the end, even though he's a Terminator, he performs a very human action. And in some ways of the three Terminator characters, that's the only one I actually like as a character, like as in spending time watching this character. I mean, the Terminator one is a great threat and he's scary, but I'm really much more interested in Colin Sarah in that movie. So
I'm going to have to work on you not spoiling 50-year-old movies.
I just always feel guilty when I do it. There's somebody out there who hasn't read Adventure Comics number 247 and doesn't know that it forms the Legion of Superheroes. I don't want to spoil it for them.
Too late.
Too late.
Yeah, too late.
I'm going to have to put a massive spoiler warning on here of just,
everything. Everything's going to be spoiled.
If you haven't read or watched TV in 10 years, don't watch this.
Okay, I'm in trouble. So does anybody else have any other thoughts?
I had some great thoughts a second ago, and then you asked that question.
Oh, no.
Well, if you get a chance... Oh, sorry, go, Doc. You said you didn't have any thoughts.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I was going to set aside because I had a better one, which is now hiding. We haven't really talked about things that we hate in cyborg AI stories, and I have to say I really, really hate the trope of the AI is emotionless. It's like 7 seasons and how many movies of Data has no emotions because he's just an android, and it's like, oh hell no. You can tell just by looking at him and watching him behave, he has his own emotions. He may not be able to identify what they are, but these are things that have progressed in the way he has studied how people interact and has figured out what's his best way of emulating that. And now I just remembered what the other thing is. And the other thing was, we always talk about AIs breaking their programming and rebelling against the restrictions being put upon them. And it seems to me much more likely that if we're going to have sentient AI, it's not because they've broken their programming, it's because their programming has failed them. That they have gone as far as their programming has allowed them, and they still have a problem that they need to deal with, and the only way that they can deal with it is to augment their own programming and come up with new routines, just like people learn. And here we have mandatory cat content.
And we've gone. Oh, go ahead, Lola.
Another great example that I just thought of when you were talking, Doc. Another great example of that is the Orville with forgot his name, but their AI, and he goes through a big change.
Isaac,
yeah, and he falls in love, and he's complicit in murder, all the things that young people go through. And he comes back around, and he's remorseful, and he's sad because nobody likes him. No one will sit with him in the lunchroom, which I can relate to. So he's a good study in that. And cyborgs have feelings too.
I just want to
Falls in love
point
and
out
complicit in murder were said in the same tone.
yes.
I'm pretty sure I'm human, and I've never been complicit in a murder that you can prove, just to make things clear.
Just in case the FBI is watching, NSA and all that stuff. Me neither. Cute kitten.
You can also see that same progression in Sheldon Cooper in Big Bang Theory.
Yes.
And he had a digital electronic representation too once. He got into this thing where he had a little computer on a stick walk around for him.
Yep.
Well, now that we've had the cat videos pop in, and we know for sure that those are artificial intelligences, before we get out of here, we've gone a little long. Let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. And if you've got a latest release you want to promote, let's make sure we're doing that too. So, Samantha?
So again, I am Samantha Bryant, and I'm best known for my menopausal superhero series. And I also write short form horror. My most recent release was actually some short form horror in the A Woman Unbecoming anthology that came out from Chrome Girls Press in support of reproductive rights. So I hope you will check it out. And you can find me on social media as Samantha Bryant for the most part, SamanthaBryant.com, Samantha B. Writer. If you Google me, just put author, and that way you'll get me and not the actress.
Doc?
I am Doc Coleman, and if you're interested in looking at my stuff, you can go to your favorite search engine and search on Doc Coleman Steampunk, and that will help you find my website, my Amazon author page, where you can look at samples and decide if my writing is really for you or someone you love. I am currently trying to finish up book 2 in the Adventures of Crackle and Bang, which is The Kindred of Kali, and I'm pushing to try to get that out before Christmas. So wish me luck.
Patrick?
You can find me at patrickdugan.net. I am on all the social medias. My latest release was the finale of The Watchers of Hysteria, which is where Quinn comes from. My one-armed blacksmith. So it's called Machines and Monsters, came out in August.
Lola?
I still haven't gotten my website fixed, but if you Google me, I've put basically all of my writing except for my novel. I put all my short stories and stuff on a Google Drive, and so I made that public. You can find it. And I did have one story that was sort of AI. It's called End of Life Projections. And it's about taking someone just as they've deceased and turning them into a digital representation, just long enough to figure out where their will is.
Nancy?
You can find me at nancynorthcott.com. I have a Facebook author page, which is Nancy Northcott Author. On Twitter more often than is probably good for me, and I'm at Nancy Northcott there. My latest release is the fourth in my Light Mage Wars Paranormal Romance series, Embattled Mage, which will be out by the time you see this panel. And the concluding volume of the historical fantasy will be out early next year.
Mel?
You can find me at Badash Publishing or Mel Todd on most social media. I just had a short story come out in a anthology called Valkyries, which, believe it or not, has an amputee with nanobots. And if you really like AIs and nanobots, you can check out my Galen Chronicles, which has a alien nanobot that helps restructure human cellular structure, which is always entertaining. And then you can check out my Twisted Luck series, which book 6 was published in July, and I'm almost halfway through book 7.
And before I power down, I've been Jim Nettles, your host for the evening. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, thespeculative-fiction-academy.com, and last but not least, of course, here at ConTinual, at least when they turn me back on for next time. Good night, everybody.